My name is Emily Miller. I'm 28 years old, and for 3 long years, my parents called every single employer I applied to and told them I had a criminal record. I didn't. I've never been arrested. I've never even had a parking ticket. But by the time I was 27, I was living in a homeless shelter, washing my hair in a gas station sink, and eating one meal a day because no one in a 50-mile radius would hire a felon. My dad would text me once a week, the same cold message every time: come home and apologize, and maybe I'll stop. Then one Tuesday morning, a woman knocked on the shelter door and said 7 words that changed everything. Your grandma hired me to find you. Before I reveal what was inside that briefcase, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Also, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it and where in the world are you listening from right now? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me take you back to the day I decided I was done asking permission to have a life. Harlem, Ohio. Population 4,000 and change. It's the kind of place where the air smells like mown grass and diesel, where everyone waves from their porch and everyone knows whose truck is parked where it shouldn't be. To the outside world, the Millers were the gold standard of decent folk. My dad, Robert, was the plant manager at the local manufacturing facility for nearly 2 decades. My mom, Susan, was the backbone of the church bake sales and volunteered at every Thanksgiving food drive. On paper, we were the family people pointed to and said, see, that's how you raise a daughter. But behind the front door of that pristine white house on Maple Street, life ran on a different set of rules. It wasn't physical, it was structural. It was a slow, suffocating kind of control that felt as natural as breathing until I realized I was gasping for air. I didn't have my own house key until I was 20. I wasn't allowed to drive more than 10 miles from home without calling ahead to check in. When I was 14 and started bussing tables at the local diner after school, my paychecks didn't go into my pocket. They went straight into a joint bank account Susan opened for safekeeping. I never saw a statement. I never asked. In the Miller house, you didn't ask questions. You just showed gratitude for the roof over your head. I graduated valedictorian, top of my class. My guidance counselor pulled me aside senior year, her eyes bright with excitement. Emily, you could go anywhere. You have scholarships, real ones. I brought those brochures home like they were trophies. My dad didn't even open them. He set them on the granite counter and said, college is for people who can't work with their hands. You've got a family here. What else does a girl your age need? For a long time, I didn't have an answer. I stayed. I cleaned, I cooked, I mowed the lawn, and I listened to my father talk about how the world was falling apart every night at dinner. But the week after I turned 25, something shifted. It wasn't a big fight or a dramatic breaking point. I was standing at the sink, scrubbing the same cast iron skillet I'd been scrubbing since I was 12, and a thought landed in my head like a rock through a window. I am going to be 40 years old, standing in this exact spot, doing this exact thing. That scared me more than anything my father had ever said. The next morning, I walked to the public library and created a new email address. Not the family one my mom monitored, but one that was just mine. I found a listing for a hardware store in Millfield, 20 minutes east. They needed a sales associate full-time, benefits, a fresh start. I typed my application with shaking fingers and hit send. 2 days later, an invitation came back. An interview on Thursday at 10 a.m. I walked home feeling something I hadn't felt in years. I think it was hope. But that night at dinner, the atmosphere was curdled. My dad sat at the head of the table, fork in one hand, newspaper folded beside his plate. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't name: cold, knowing, and deeply disappointed. My mother stood at the sink with her back to us, washing dishes that were already clean. Nobody said a word, but the silence was screaming. They knew, and I was about to find out exactly how far they would go to keep me from ever leaving that table. The morning of my interview in Millfield, I wore my best floss and a smile I'd been practicing in the mirror. I walked into that hardware store feeling like I was finally stepping into my own life. The manager, Mike, a rugged man with silver hair and reading glasses, shook my hand warmly. But 10 minutes into the interview, the air in the room changed. He kept looking down at my application, then back at me, his brow furrowed. "Emily," he said, leaning back and sighing, "I'm going to be straight with you. We received a phone call yesterday. Someone, I won't say who, mentioned a felony theft charge in your background." The room tilted. I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's not true," I stammered. "I've never even been in the back of a police car." But the damage was done. Mike looked at me with a mix of pity and professional caution. He had a business to run, and a concerned citizen had just whispered poison in his ear. I walked out of that store feeling like a ghost. Over the next 6 weeks, it became a haunting routine. I applied to a grocery store in Ridgeway, a warehouse on the county line, and a small diner in Cooperton. 3 interviews. 3 sudden rejections within 48 hours. The warehouse never called back. The grocery store said the position was suddenly filled. But the diner owner, a woman named Pat, was the only one brave enough to look me in the eye. "Honey," she whispered, leaning over the counter. "A woman called here. Said she was a concerned neighbor. She told me you had a record for fraud and theft." She sounded so convincing. That night, I didn't cry. I waited until the house was silent, until the rhythmic snoring of my father echoed through the vents. I crept down the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs, and entered my mother's sewing room. It was the only place in the house that was strictly hers. I opened the top drawer of her oak desk, pushing aside fabric scraps and pincushions until my fingers hit something cold and smooth. It was a small blue notebook. I opened it, and the world stopped spinning. There, in my mother's neat, elegant cursive, the same handwriting she used to sign my birthday cards, was a list. Millfield Hardware, Ridgeway Fresh Mart, County Line Logistics, Cooperton Family Diner, and next to every single name was a bright red checkmark. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't protection. This was a hit list. My own mother was tracking my every move, hunting down my dreams before they could even breathe. I stood in that dark room, clutching the notebook, realizing that the people who were supposed to be my sanctuary were actually my jailers. The next morning, I didn't hide. I placed the blue notebook right on the kitchen table, next to my father's buttered toast and my mother's steaming coffee. "Explain this," I said, my voice trembling but sharp. Susan didn't even look at the book at first. She just watched the coffee spill over her cup as her hand shook. Then the tears started, the famous Miller tears. "You went through my things? Is this how I raised you, Emily? To be a spy in your own home. You called them," I fired back. "You told them I was a criminal. Why?" My dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "We're protecting you, Emily," Robert said, his voice as calm as a Sunday morning. "You think you can survive out there? You can't even manage your own bank account. The world will chew you up. We're just making sure you stay where you're safe." "I'm 25. I screamed. "If you don't stop, I'm leaving." Robert finally folded his paper, his eyes cold as flint. "You walk out that door, you walk out with nothing. No money, no papers, no family. You won't last a week." He wasn't bluffing. When I tried to access my savings that afternoon, the balance was zero. Susan had drained every cent I'd ever earned. My birth certificate and social security card were locked in their floor safe. I was a 25-year-old woman with no identity, no money, and a criminal record created by the two people who gave me life. At 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, I packed a single backpack and walked down the driveway of the house on Maple Street. I had $12 in my pocket and a phone with 11% battery. As I reached the end of the curb, a text buzzed from my father. "Come home. Apologize." "I'll think about it." I didn't reply. I turned the phone off and kept walking into the dark, realizing that for the first time in my life, I was homeless, but I was finally, terrifyingly free. The first week at the Harland Community Shelter smelled of industrial-grade bleach and old soup. It was a converted warehouse on Mill Street, a place where the fluorescent lights never truly stopped buzzing, a constant reminder that you were living in a temporary world. I was the youngest person there by 15 years, sleeping on bed 14 with my backpack tucked under my head like a pillow. Linda, the woman who ran the shelter, was a no-nonsense saint with reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She didn't ask for my life story. She just handed me a thin towel and said, "You don't have to explain why you're here, Emily. You just have to want to get back up." I spent my days in a frantic loop of survival. I washed dishes in the shelter kitchen for extra meals and spent hours at the public library trying to replace my life. Filing for a new birth certificate, 6 to 8 weeks. Trying to get a state ID without a social security card, a bureaucratic nightmare that sent me in circles. But the hardest part wasn't the paperwork, it was the realization that my parents' reach was longer than I ever imagined. I thought if I applied for jobs 40 miles away, in towns they never visited, I'd be safe. I was wrong. I landed an interview at a family restaurant in Granton. I borrowed a clean blouse from another resident and took 2 county buses just to get there. The manager, Dave, seemed impressed. He told me I'd hear from him by Friday. Thursday morning, the phone rang. "Emily, I'm sorry. We've decided to go in a different direction," Dave said, his voice tight. "Can I ask why?" I whispered, my heart sinking. There was a long, heavy pause. "Someone emailed us a document, Emily. It looked like a police report. A theft charge. I can't take that risk." I sat on my cot, staring at the peeling gray paint on the walls. My father had spent 20 years as a plant manager. He knew how to draft memos, how to format official-looking paperwork, and how to use old company letterheads to make a lie look like a fact. They hadn't just called, they had upgraded to digital sabotage. They were creating a paper trail of my failures to ensure I had nowhere to go but back to them. That evening, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I knew the cadence of the words. "Getting cold out there, isn't it? The door is still open. All you have to do is say you're sorry." I deleted it, but I couldn't delete the fear that they were winning. It was Linda who finally broke the cycle. She pulled me into her office one afternoon, the heavy blue-painted brick she used as a doorstop, the only thing keeping the room from feeling like a cage. "Emily, remember that woman who came by last month? The one asking for you." I froze. Did my dad hire a private investigator to find me? "I don't think so," Linda said, sliding a slightly bent business card across the desk. She didn't seem like trouble. She seemed like someone looking for a person she cared about. I picked up the card. Karen White, licensed private investigator. I didn't call the number right away. I was terrified it was another trap, another clever ruse by Robert and Susan to lure me back. But the card stayed in my pocket, moving from one pair of thrift store jeans to the next. Then came the final blow. Linda called me in again, her face pale. "Emily, I got a call today from someone claiming to be a social worker. She said you had a documented history of violence and that you posed a risk to the other residents here." The room went cold. My mother. She wasn't just trying to keep me from working anymore. She was trying to take away the last roof I had over my head. She wanted me on the street, cold and hungry enough to finally break. But as I sat there, listening to the buzz of the lights, I didn't feel like crying. For the first time, the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They thought they were the only ones who knew how to play this game. They forgot that I was a Miller, too. I reached into my pocket, pulled out Karen White's card, and dialed. "Hello," a calm, steady voice answered. "This is Emily Miller," I said. "I think you've been looking for me." "Emily," Karen replied, and I could almost hear the relief in her voice. "I've been waiting 10 years for this phone call. Your grandmother, Martha, she made sure you wouldn't have to do this alone." Karen White arrived at the shelter the next morning at 8 a.m. sharp. She didn't look like the private investigators you see in the movies, no trench coat, no mysterious sunglasses. She was a woman in her mid-50s with short gray hair and a navy blazer that screamed professional. She carried a weathered brown leather briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of secrets. We sat in the corner of the common room, the only place where the hum of the heater drowned out the murmurs of other residents. She set the briefcase on the table between us. In faded black ink, right near the handle, were 5 words that made my throat tighten. "For Emily. When she's ready." It was my grandmother Martha's handwriting. "My name is Karen White," she began, her voice steady and low. "Your grandmother hired me 10 years ago. You would have been 18. 10 years. I whispered. Why? Because Martha knew her son, Karen said, her eyes softening. She lived with a man just like Robert for 30 years, your grandfather. She saw the walls closing in on you before you even felt them. She paid me a retainer up front for a decade of surveillance. Her instructions were very specific: watch, record, and wait until Emily has nowhere else to turn. Karen opened the briefcase, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt the ground stabilize beneath my feet. Inside was a thick manila folder, tabbed and organized with the precision of a master architect. I've been monitoring your parents' communications for years, Karen explained. I have recordings of 37 separate phone calls your mother made to your potential employers. I have copies of the fabricated police reports your father created, complete with the metadata tracing them back to his home computer. I even have photos of that blue notebook, taken through the kitchen window during my visits. I leafed through the pages. It was all there. Every lie, every forged document, every concerned neighbor call, documented, time-stamped, and verified. It wasn't just a folder. It was a weapon. Is this, is this enough to stop them? I asked, my voice trembling. It's enough to do much more than that, Emily, Karen replied. She reached into a side compartment and pulled out a sealed cream-colored envelope. My name was on the front in Martha's elegant cursive. I opened it with shaking hands. Emily, the letter began. If you're reading this, things have gotten as bad as I feared. I'm sorry I couldn't stop your father while I was alive. I tried, but men like Robert don't listen to reason. They only understand consequences. I spent my last years making sure you wouldn't be trapped in the same cage I was. Inside this briefcase is your way out. Don't use it for revenge, use it for freedom. I love you more than he ever let me show. Grandma Martha. Beneath the letter lay a stack of legal documents from a law office in Millfield. Karen pointed to the summary page. When Martha sold the farm 10 years ago, she didn't spend a dime. She put the proceeds into a trust. It's been managed conservatively, growing every year. As of today, the balance is $340,000. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. $340,000. It wasn't just money, it was the ability to breathe. It was a lawyer, a car, an apartment with a lock that only I had the key to. Your father has no idea this exists, Karen said. Martha was explicit. She knew if he found out, he'd find a way to take it or use it to pull you back. She said you had to need it first. You had to be ready to walk away forever. I looked at the temporary ID I'd fought so hard to get, sitting on the table next to the folder. I realized then that I wasn't the broken girl my parents wanted me to be. I was the woman my grandmother knew I could become. Karen, I said, looking her in the eye, I need a lawyer. The best litigator in the county. Karen smiled, and for the first time, it didn't feel like I was hiding. I already took the liberty of calling James Anderson. He's expecting us at 2 p.m. The tide hadn't just turned. It was coming in like a tsunami. Today, I'm 28, working as a legal assistant and living in my own quiet apartment with my cat, Martha. I haven't spoken to my parents since the court ruling, and that's okay. This journey taught me a vital lesson. True love builds a bridge to your freedom. It doesn't build a cage to keep you small. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Thank you for listening, and remember, you are worth the fight. See you in the next one.